Me and my current girlfriend, who we'll call Brittany, are co-workers. Of course, this is kind of against company policy because of the possibility of there being a conflict of interest, among other reasons. However, we are both outstanding employees that don't let it affect our work, but we still have tried to keep it on the down low to avoid unnecessary backlash. That was until we found out two of our other favorite co-workers had started dating. We'll call them Max and Kristen. It wasn't long after they started dating that the idea of a double date came up. Although, seeing as how we are technically breaking the rules, we didn't want to be seen out in public as couples, and in our area, it was pretty common to run into people you knew. I remembered just about 2 weeks earlier that my father told me about a really cool nature center that doubles as a small campground and has a few secluded cabins. We're all outdoorsy type of people, so we all agreed to put it on our schedule for an early October weekend, as summer in Ohio is very humid and often lousy with gnats and mosquitoes. I in particular hate summer weather because I get hot and sweaty fairly easily. The weekend finally arrived though, and we get on the road beginning our 1.5-hour trip. Luckily, my fast driving cut out about 15 minutes or so, and with little to no cops patrolling the back roads of the boonies, it was not too bad of a drive. We got to the cabin, which was tiny, but more than enough for the weekend. As far as we knew, we were the only ones there besides a few daytime hikers, but no other campers appeared to be staying the night. The desk worker told us that they really don't get too many campers this time of year. It was mostly just older couples that hike the short trails and have picnics. And all in all, it was a pretty laid-back place. We got to the cabin about 2 p.m, and after getting settled, we decided to hike down to the river, which was about a 25-minute hike. Of course, with the higher weather the way it is, October was still rather hot, much warmer than I'd hoped for, and I ended up working up a decent sweat. I was the only one brave enough to get into the cold, murky water completely. The others would only come into about knee-deep, and they was lucky they even did this. Not 10 minutes after we got into the water, a very creepy woman came out of the woods though, and she looked to be staring us down and eyeing our belongings that we were sitting not far from, and she was just standing there. The others were able to get out of the river quickly, and the woman walked off, noticeably talking to herself, stumbling up the path. She definitely did not look like a hiker. She looked more like a homeless moonshiner or something. But to be fair, we were in the middle of nowhere, and people around here didn't care much about looks. We all brushed it off pretty quickly, and started thinking about what to do for dinner. We sat along a small sandbar along the riverbank trying to decide if we should go into the little town about 30 minutes down the road, or if we should just make a campfire and grill the food that we had brought with us. It seemed pretty obvious that Max and Kristen didn't care much, as long as we were back at a reasonable time so that they could get a decent evening hike in before it got too dark. We decided to just go ahead with the campfire idea though, and be a bit more outdoorsy I suppose. Max and I were on firewood duty, while the females got the food ready, which really just consisted of them cutting open packages and waiting for us to start the fire, which we told them that we would do, and we argued about who had to do more work, but it was all just in good fun. While gathering the wood though, we noticed a few deer bones, and at first it was pretty neat because we could see that they were mostly intact, which is weird because other animals would normally break bones when trying to get onto the meat, but we didn't really think anything of it until after about 5 minutes of heading in the same direction, and we started seeing more and more bones. And I mean that there were tons of them, like it was a mass graveyard for animals or something. This, I knew, was definitely not natural, and at first I was afraid that there was maybe something bad in the water, or maybe there was something bad in the soil, but then we started hearing it. Weird, creepy chattering. I can only describe it as menacing whispers with a bit of growling and hissing. We thought it was some animal, maybe an injured coyote. That's really the only predator we have in these parts. Very rarely do bears ever turn up. They would have to travel a long way undetected to get here, and a bear would be more recognizable than that, and it wouldn't be afraid of just 2 men. We looked around for a minute, but decided that it wasn't really worth the time and were admittedly a bit creeped out. We were gone longer than expected, and when we got back, we found that the girls had a bit of a strange encounter as well. They heard the same noise, but they also heard it in multiple directions. And they also mentioned hearing leaves and sticks shuffling around a lot, as if someone was making circles around our campsite. Well, we all agreed that we should get the fire going to hopefully deter any would-be animal intruders. It ended up a bit later than we had liked, due to the commotion, but we made our food and soon forgot about the weird noises we had heard. It turned out about as good as one would expect a campfire grill out to be, and Max and Kristen decided to take their walk, now convinced that everything was okay. Me and my girlfriend, we decided to stick by the campfire and just relax. I've always loved just sitting around at night, listening to the crickets and other noisy insects. We finally got that cool fresh autumn breeze to set in, and I too was convinced that the scary from earlier was just our paranoia. I'd say a good 40 minutes had passed, and we were still waiting for the others to return. And to be quite honest, neither of us were worried about them because we were almost positive that they were off fooling around in the woods, if you know what I mean. About another 5 or 10 minutes later though, and we heard leaves and sticks rustling a few yards behind us and assumed that they had made their way around to the small circular trail. Brittany called out to them, asking how their walk was in a very sarcastic manner, obviously mocking them for what we assumed was going on. We got quiet when there was no answer, thinking that we embarrassed Kristen, so I called out a second time telling them to hurry up already, and still no answer and no footsteps either. I got up and flashed a flashlight in the direction of where I remembered hearing the footsteps, and it's at this time that I realized that this was not where the trailhead leads out. The directions where the noises were coming from was nothing but more woods, and the trailhead actually lets out on the left side of our camp, far from where the footsteps were coming from. Kristen is not afraid of the outdoors, but she's also not the type to try and hike through thick brush, so the footsteps we heard are very unlikely to be the two coming back. I immediately got a familiar creeped out feeling like I had before. I told my girlfriend to stay close to the fire, and she grabbed the stick that we had whittled into a spear while we were waiting. I walked the campsite with the flashlight, looking for anything weird, and I definitely found it. Our car was parked along the side of the cabin, and between the cabin and the car, there were more bones. However, these were clearly more fresh. Meat, blood, and fur were still all around the bones, and then I looked in the car window and saw that it had clearly been gone through. The bags that we didn't take into the cabin were still in the car, and they were completely ransacked. This completely set me off, mostly because we were only 10 to 15 feet away, and someone was watching us and digging through our belongings. Luckily, the gun box under my seat was locked. I, of course, quickly unlocked it and got out my 9mm Smith & Wesson revolver. We only left the car unlocked because we were so close, and we were supposed to be the only ones at the campground. I'm now worried about Max and Kristen. They've been gone a while at this point, and there is some very creepy personal people out here eating fresh animals and digging through our shit. Brittany is now in the cabin, and I've moved the car to where it's now facing away from the cabin, toward the road, out of the grounds. It's no use trying to call them out here, due to no reliable cell signal too. I wanted to go look for them, but I didn't want to leave my girlfriend at the cabin alone because we have no idea how many creeps are out here. We wait another 30 minutes, and then out by the fire, I see a figure, and I'll be damned to see that it's the same creepy woman from the beach when I shine the flashlight over at her. It's hard to see any detail, but I know it's her. And just at that moment, I see Max crouched behind a tree to the left of the cabin. I don't signal motion to him at all, not wanting to draw any attention in his direction, and the woman is clearly focused on the cabin. But I can see Max is trying to point at something, and I tell Brittany to check the right side of the cabin, not wanting to lose sight of this woman. I get the sinking feeling that she's trying to draw us out into the open. And that's when Brittany screams, and a moment later a huge husky man appears from around the corner. However, the man is not the creepiest thing I see in that moment. At first glance, behind the man, it looked like there were two hairless and humanoid-looking dogs. Their walk was completely wrong and horrifying. Dogs walk with their heads up and keep their feet and legs mostly straight underneath them. These dogs, these things, walked more like a large lizard, throwing their legs out to the side and lumbering forward. They stayed back too, close to the tree line, but definitely not trying to hide. The fact that the man and the woman both were moving towards us made this even more scary. They just stood there, watching us at the window. But at this point, I knew that we could just sit and wait. Max is a reasonably fit guy, and I believe that he could make it inside the cabin without the man or his dogs catching him, plus he was a bit closer to the door already. The only worry was, could Kristen make it? I look in Max's direction and step out the door, trembling the whole time. I aim my gun at the man and yell for Max to run. This is the first time that I see the creepy pair move. I assumed that they were surprised to see Max appear from behind the tree. Luckily, they were so caught off guard that neither one acted fast enough to get anywhere near the door before Matt. The man didn't even attempt to move, but the woman seemed rather pissed and stepped a bit closer and kicked at the fire, putting it out, leaving us blind unless we used our flashlights, which were rather cheap and didn't do much on their own. It was almost immediately that I realized that only Max had made it inside, and at that, it looked like he just barely made it back to the campground at all. He was covered in dirt and scratches. Nothing too serious, but much worse than anyone can get on a normal hiking trip. Max explained to us that on their walk, him and Kristen ended up near another rundown cabin that was clearly no longer in use. It wasn't even on the main roads of the grounds. They were on one of the nature trails that was literally in the woods, and all the listed cabins have dirt or shitty paved roads to them. Max said that he looked in the window of the cabins and there were plants growing through the floorboards and holes in the roof, but the covered porch had canned food and sleeping bags spread all around the floor, and bones were outside, all around the ground again. Then Kristen noticed a man standing in the window, and she took off down the trail. Max caught her, stopping her, not knowing what she saw, and by the time that she told him, the man was right there with them and tried to grab her right in front of him. Apparently Max fought him off, but only after they both exchanged punches and Kristen already ran off. The man ran back toward the cabin, and Max ran to our side, hoping to meet Kristen here. We now are terrified that she is off somewhere lost with more of these people out there. One detail that really bothered me too is that the woman, she just appeared out of nowhere, and the man and his dogs trekked through the thick brush almost as fast as Max, who was on the open trail. In other words, they clearly know this area and are very good and make it around very quickly. My hope is that Kristen made it to the nature center. It is mostly a straight shot if she can make it to the main road, but if she's stuck on the trails, she could be anywhere, wandering the trails, or even end up deeper in the woods, headed away from us. We were now without the brighter light of the fire and have no idea where these people are too. We argued for a good 20 minutes about what to do. We knew that we had to do something to find Kristen, but coming up with a plan that didn't sound ridiculous was harder than we thought. And none of us knew the area, and I feared that they had traps in place and was immediately being very paranoid. I planned to make a dash for the car and get to the nature center. That was the main reason I turned the car around in the first place. I was banking on Kristen making it there before us, but Max didn't think that that sounded like something she would do. He figured that she was still somewhere on the trail hiding and waiting it out. I didn't want to admit it, but that did sound more likely, meaning that we were going to have to try and outmaneuver these guys in the woods, which seemed very unlikely, seeing as how they have already been moving quickly through our campsite and the trails undetected. I did have a gun, yes, but it's pitch black under the trees, and this is a 5-shot revolver. There's no room to be careless in this situation. Eventually, we come to a decision and we decide that we'll head for the nature center and hopefully put some distance between us and the creepy couple, and we will backtrack through the trails if Kristen is not there. I also hoped that we would get some service around the nature center, due to it being in a clearing and about 2 miles away from where we currently were. I was the first out of the cabin, while Max brought up the rear with his flashlight and a large camp hatchet. Brittany was in the middle and still had her sharpened spear. We made it into the car without seeing a thing, and we sat in the car for a minute or two before we took off, waiting to see if they would show themselves. Not knowing where they were was the worst part of the ordeal, in fact. But luckily, we made it out without any problems to the nature center, but there was no sign of Kristen anywhere. Brittany, at this point, wanted to rethink our plan. Going back in there on foot didn't make much sense, and I agreed, but we couldn't just leave without her. So at this point, we decided to split up. Me and Max were going to head back into the woods and get Kristen, and Brittany, she would take the car to town and get the police. I did feel a bit more comfortable with this plan, knowing that help would soon be on the way with plenty of guns to deal with these assholes. Plus, we could move fast just as me and Max, and it's one less person we have to protect. Before she headed out though, we pulled the car to one side of the building and propped up some of the bags to look like people in the passenger seat and in the back seat. And just in case we were being watched, we wanted it to look like we had left. We waited until the car's taillights had disappeared, and then we headed down the trail that would eventually connect our campsite's trail. We were making decent time, and weren't being terribly loud, which made it all the more surprising when I suddenly got knocked to the ground by something growling and crawling at me. I fired one shot and hit it square in the head as it bit down on my leg, near ripping out a chunk. Max stood there with the light pointing down at the dog. Only, now that we see it up close, it's clearly not a dog. This is a person. Those creepy disfigured-looking dogs are at best guess the feral offspring of those two disgusting homeless people. This one looked to be about 20-ish, maybe late teens. I'm judging mostly by its size and how scarred up it was. The scars looked old, and if he would stand, he would probably just be taller than me. I was mortified, but also a little relieved. I felt like I could handle a crazy crawling wild person, if I had to anyway. Not saying that this was okay, but it was just slightly better knowing that they aren't giant dogs. If it had been a bloodthirsty dog that size, I'd definitely be dead right now. I think Max was having a much harder time with this realization, but he was able to continue after I snapped him out of it. I was having a moment where I felt like we were all honestly going to be just fine, but as the lunatics would have it, that moment was quickly gone and replaced with a sinking feeling as we heard the foulest screams from across the ridge. Those feral things were screeching as loud and as awful as they could. I could tell at this point that there were more than just two that we saw at the campsite. I got to thinking that this one did just knock me on my ass, and if there are any bigger ones, they may be just as dangerous as the dog after all. And just like that, the little adrenaline I have left kicks in, and I'm busting down the path calling for Kristen, ignoring our previous stealthy approach. We can hear them screeching as we run, and then through our calling for our friend and the screeching of these dog people, we're hearing the thunderous bellows of a man screaming at us. He yells for his children to tear us apart, and I can tell by the lack of an echo he's definitely behind us, blocking any chance that we have of turning around. Before we get to the next fork in the road, I take a sharp turn, hoping Max will follow, and I head up the rocky hillside and duck down. Max made the turn, but didn't make it up as high as I did, due to the loose rock, making him fall. He landed, and thankfully, there was a bit of a ditch with low brush in front of it, because, not 30 seconds later, the man comes barreling around the corner, with an axe in his hand. Our axe, in fact. My heart is pounding through my ribs, and any bravery I had is gone now. I can see Max laying deathly still in the ditch below. We still have about a quarter mile to go before we even get to the connecting trail, and there is no knowing how long it will take to actually find Kristen. I feel defeated, and am seriously considering turning back now that the man is past us and the route is clear. My leg is bloody from where his dog child bit me, not to mention the hundreds of scrapes and scratches and bruises covering my arms and face now. I get up and make my way down to Max, not sure of what to do yet. I actually vomited almost immediately when I got there. And Max was not being quiet because he was hiding. Max had passed away. When he fell, a tree branch had pierced through his neck. This only reinforced what I had felt before. I was getting out of here. I really did try, but there was no telling how many of these things are out there, and finding Kristen would be like looking for a needle in a haystack in a pitch-black room. I head back up the path, returning to my speedy but stealthy approach, not even using my flashlight. I move using memory and what little moonlight makes it through the gaps in the trees. I made it back up the hill, about 30 yards from the clearing where the nature center was, when I see who else but Kristen banging on the doors to the locked building. I was begging her to run as I was running towards her, making it into the clearing just as the woman and the 3 of those feral people came running up the road. I was definitely going to reach Kristen first, but the fastest feral person stood up, and this is where I'm pretty sure I pissed myself. With the last of my shots, I shot in the glass door, pushing Kristen inside. I grabbed anything not nailed down and pushed it in front of the door. The gun, now being useless, I made sure to find spare weapons, one of which was a display hand sickle. I gave Kristen the fire axe in an attempt to make her look more lethal than she was. I was preparing for the man and those things to burst through the barricade any second now, and then a rock comes smashing through the window. I point my gun at the window, hoping that they don't realize I'm bluffing, because I am fully relying on this little sickle for defense. The man looks at me through the barricade, sizing up my defenses, and then just turns around. I look out into the lawn, and there's still only 2 of those things with the woman, assuming 4 was all they had. I assume it's about 6:30ish in the morning because the sun is now rising too. For a while, they all just stood there, staring at us as the sun kept rising. And finally, the man began to move, and I again prepared for the worst as he got closer. But he stopped at the corpse of one of the feral persons that I shot. He grabbed it by the leg and dragged it off into the woods. And that was the last that we saw of them. At 8 a.m., the Nature Center clerk arrived, and was understandably very confused when she got to the door. After convincing her that we weren't crazy intruders, she called the police and they arrived within 30 minutes. I immediately asked them where Brittany was, and I told them that she went looking for help in town, and the lady mentioned a call that she responded to last night about a car crash, and said that the description I gave matched to a T, and that she was fine at the nearest hospital, which was not actually near here at all, being as we were in the boonies. The medic checked our wounds and gave us a lift to the hospital. Other than mental fatigue, our injuries were not all that serious. Kristen barely said a word the whole time. Even at the mention of Max's accident, she hardly showed any reaction. The official statement made by police was basically that we all got a little too scared by some harmless homeless people, and Max's death was just an unfortunate night hiking accident. And without much to go on, they completely omitted the part about feral children. They concluded that the bones were just years' worth of hunting and living in the woods, and that doesn't prove that they ever harmed anyone. Plus, the police said that they actually knew these people, and that they had completely moved on, and there was nothing more that they could do. Honestly, they clearly just wanted to close the case and move on from it. All in all, the 3 of us came out okay, I guess. Or so I thought. I found out from Brittany that Kristen ended up terminating a pregnancy not long after that incident. She never would tell us how she was able to get away without being detected at all, and not having any cut at all except for some minor scrapes to the back. We don't hear from her much at all anymore, but we try to stay in touch and catch up as much as we can when she does occasionally answer us. But whatever happened to her while she was alone, it definitely scared her more than she wants us to know. G'day mates, it's Busta here. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Thanks again to the Hive members that bravely shared their stories for us all here, and I hope you guys are all doing really well. For the chance to have your story feature in a video, you can send your story to my email, which is in the description below. If you would like more scary stories too, you can click on the card at the top right of your screen or on one of the annotations on your screen right now. As always guys, it would be awesome if you could like, share, comment, and subscribe if you're new. Don't forget to follow me on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram for updates throughout the week. And also, if you would like content early and completely advert-free for as little as $1 a month, feel free to click on the link to my Patreon account and sign up there for regular MP3 format stories. Thanks again for tuning in and for all the love as always, guys, and I'll see you mates in the next one.